Hello and welcome everybody. This is Dr. Terrence Duncan, and today we're going to go over the framework and the significance of the study.
We are back for another episode.
In this particular
Muhammad
learner
Narcotics.
module, the focus
Today we're going to
is
talk about
always
boundaries.
going to be
We're going
about
to go over and talk
alignment, but
about
we're going to
boundaries,
tie it all
filling a
together.
little gap
You may
in
recall
harmony.
that the
Some
general
refer to
problem
it in other
is a
referring
broader
to it. So
overview,
on this
more of a
show, we're going to
30,000
just talk
foot
about how busy we really have
perspective,
been
more of an
as of
airplane
late.
mode that you're
So
looking at the problem. It is
we're here
broad.
now,
So
so
if you're
that's all that
looking at
matters. And
studying
Queen Mom,
electronic
how you
medical
doing today?
records and physician
I'm doing
resistance,
wonderful.
you
Thanks
will
for
look at
asking.
the
Thank you for
United
joining
States
in,
and how it
everybody.
struggles as a
I'm looking
whole,
forward to the
and then
topic
you
that you
slide
have
over
found
to
for
the
me today.
specific
We
problem,
do have a lot
which
to cover.
narrows the scope of the project. So we're going
Absolutely,
from
absolutely. So what's
30,000
going on in your
feet
world? So,
to a
for those who are
closer
not
bird's eye
on the
view
social,
into the problem.
just a little bit what's going on with your
From
world
there,
for the
you will
past couple
slide
of
to the
days or so.
purpose statement, which
Well, there's
identifies
been a
your
lot
study
going on. In
approach,
fact, as
your
far as
participants,
social
as well as
goes,
the
even before
demographics,
following me, I
such
haven't
as
been on
the
there that
area
much
that you're
lately
going to
because
study
I've been
or
so busy,
the
mostly
criteria for
doing
the
mental
participants
health
that
with
are selected
workplace
for your
corporate
study.
America.
And
So I
then you
have
will
booked
move to your research
trainings
questions,
and
which are
placement
central
tickets, things like
questions that are
that.
guiding the
Of course,
study.
seeing
And
clients.
so, as you may
Outside of that,
recall,
just
interview questions
trying
are
to make sure
more
that
for
I'm
the
taking care
survey
of
itself.
myself
They are
in
not
the
the central
process of
questions.
all
Those
of
are
the
just
busyness.
questions that you would ask
This
your
year
respondents,
came in with
where
a
the
big bang.
central questions,
It's
they
been
are
nonstop
no,
emphasis.
typically no more than three,
As
usually
Brooke
about
and I
two or
would say
three.
before we
And if
started
you have a
recording, it's
quantitative
a great
study, you'll
thing,
have a
but
hypothesis
sometimes it becomes
for every
unanswerable
research
almost
question.
at times. So we have
And
to make
then
sure that we
finally,
break
you will
that
move
down,
to the method selection.
which is why I
That's where
value
you want to
learning with
identify
you.
qualitative versus
Yeah,
quantitative.
very
As I
important.
stated
And same
before,
thing here.
for the
For
candidates
those who
that I
have
work
followed
with,
on
as well as the
social, who have
doctoral
not,
students,
been all over the place,
try not to
and
use mixed
that's been
methods
part of my
because it
plan
takes
going into
longer, it's more time
2023.
intensive,
You may
and
recall in previous
most
episode
students
I
don't
said I
have
don't
the resources
necessarily
to
have
be able to
resolutions, but I do try
maintain
to set
that
goals
length of
to
study.
accomplish throughout the year. One of them was to expand and increase my reach of networking, because that's
Before
how
we continue
a lot of
for this particular
opportunities
learner
can come
module,
about,
we
come
wanted
out
to
by
go
being
back to
organic.
address the
So on
doctoral
social media, you
challenges
might
that
meet people and
students
be interested
may
in what you
encounter throughout the
explain
entire
based on
process.
certain
And
algorithms.
so one of the biggest
Whereas
challenges
when
I
you're face
see
to
if
face
you're a
with
student listening
individuals
to
and
this
you're working in
video
a room,
is
you'll
the
be
emphasis
amazed at
of
the
getting an
type of
A or
connection that you
4.0 in
may
the
have, or
program.
even
I would be
reach
honest with
reach.
you
So
that I actually had
that's
a
something I've been
3.8,
doing a
3 or
lot
something
since
to that
the
effect.
month
But
of
when you do
February,
graduate,
and
the
so
only
now
thing that
it's
matters is the piece
Madness
of
month.
paper that
So for
said
those who
that
know
your
me,
dissertation
these next couple of
and
Thursday,
you
Friday,
went through the
Saturdays, and
program and
Sundays, I'll
everything
be
has been
glued from the television
conferred,
from 11
your
a.m.
GPA is
to
not
11
something that you'll
p.m.,
bring in
maybe
the
a little
course
bit
of a
later, depending on
conversation.
when the games
So,
end.
meaning that I've
And if
done
you are texting
numerous
me, hopefully it's going
academic
to be a short text
presentations, interacted
conversation
with
because
different
it's not about the game, about the
professionals who have
research.
their
So
terminal
it's my
degree,
favorite time of the
and
year.
nobody's
My
talking
team is
about
not in
their grades. I
North
think it's a good
Carolina Tar Heels.
milestone
It was at a
to
championship
be able
last
to
year. Went
focus
to the
on,
game.
but
The Niner game this
ultimately
year. The Niners
passing your
playing my
dissertation
team.
milestones
Mad I'm
is
doing
more
right now,
important.
just for
So
the way they
the
play
way
by the
that some of
Chiefs.
these
So my
classes
phone
are
bounced,
structured in
and so at
reality,
least as a
the
reward.
rubric is
So got a
designed
little
to give
bonus this year.
students
Still love you.
a
You play
reasonable
like bones,
opportunity to maintain
especially as
the
we early
program,
in
because
this
it does
season. So
acknowledge that some
hopefully we get
students
it
will pick it
together
up
next
earlier
year.
than
But
others. So if you found yourself
that's the
struggling
life of a
early
sports
on,
fan.
but you're still
You get
maintaining
so
B's, then
wrapped
you
up
know
with
where
it
you need to
sometimes
continue to
that
work on.
you
Because
just
once
kind
you
of
become a
recognize and
doctoral
lose. So
candidate
it's really
and you are
disappointing.
formally writing on your
But
dissertation,
I'm
it's
still
either
going to be
pass or fail
100%, a thousand
or
percent
approve or
committed
not
to not
approve,
only
just
the
depending on
men's
who's the reviewing
NCAA
party
tournament, but also
and
I'll be
depending on
watching
the
the women's
framework of the dissertation
NCAA
manual.
tournament, because I definitely love the different
You
style
should
of
also
play
note that
between
there
the
are
two
thousands of articles,
groups.
resources, and
And
videos
also, it's
available
just
that
seems
can
like
be
it's
able
more
to assist
technical
your learning. So
with the women's
if
group
you
than it
find
is with the
yourself,
men, as far as the
especially if
style of
you're one of my
play,
students
and
or a
defense. So
candidate, and you
looking
find
forward to
yourself
that.
frustrated with
But
some of the feedback and comments that I'm providing
outside of
you,
that, nothing else has
remember
been
that the
going on in
doctoral
particular.
journey is
But
so much different from
wanted
the
to make sure
graduate
that we're
journey,
still recording.
whereas the
And
doctoral
I
journey
know
is
it
actually
hasn't been as
independent
frequent
study.
as
And so
as it
that
has
you
been in
have to
times
task
past.
yourself,
But
you have to
we
teach
first
yourself,
started during
train
the
yourself
pandemic,
to get
and
more
it's not really
comfortable
really
and
an excuse, but
familiar
it's just the reality. We all
identifying
have
different
different
articles, resources,
responsibilities and
or videos
obligations.
that may
And the very
be
first
able to help
responsibility and
address any kind of
obligation is
knowledge
to
gaps
us
that
and
you
our
may have
families,
about the
in
dissertation
our
process.
career and our profession. So
The other thing
we
too is
got to
that
get all the
humility.
students
I always speak to
transitioning
humility
students,
to my
and
candidates. I know that
the
it's it's frustrating that you're going to get a lot of rejections and that you're going to get a lot of feedback that you may feel like it's personal, but it's not personal. It's just really just a black and white type of feedback. You know, we're looking at, are you meeting not only just the basic academic standards of writing, but also are you meeting the key expectations that's set forth? And so you have to remind yourself that this being a doctoral student or a candidate is part of an apprenticeship. And so once you do get your doctorate, whether it's a PhD or whether it's one of the hybrid scholar practitioner related degrees, then you can provide your perspective and your outlook with a little bit more authority. But at this time, this is the point where you have to go back to followership. And you may recall from previous lectures about the importance of followership. scholarship.
way.
You are
But
learning
I
to
think that,
become
you
a
know, going to
leader
the extremes
in
and not
academic research.
responding
And
to
so
certain
because of that,
messages, just phone
some of the
calls or
feedback you're
whatever,
going to
because then
receive
that's
is
just
not
your
going to be
style.
pleasant
But
from
you
your
know, to each
perspective
their
if you
own.
allow it to not be
So have
present.
you seen,
Pleasant, I'm sorry.
like the way
The
I've seen in my
Additionally, how much
sisters,
time
where
are you
you know a lot
dedicating
of
to the
discussion
review?
about boundaries
You
and things of
should
that
be
nature.
conducting
Yeah,
double the time
absolutely.
that you are
Actually, on a daily
reviewing on your
basis.
own
And
independently
I think
outside of the
the word I
materials
tell
if
people
you're a doctoral
typically
student
use is
and you're receiving
my
such material.
cutoff game is
There is
strong. And
not
I've
one
heard people
university
say
that will
things like
provide
that,
you
that
in a
that's what they
classroom
do.
every
They believe that
single
this is
article, book,
something
or
that's important.
resource
And
to
here's the
use
thing.
specific to your study.
I
That is, it goes back
I
to what I
will
stated
caution
before
people
about independent
when it
study.
comes to that,
This is
cutting
where
people off so
it's
rapidly.
important for you to make sure that you're
There
allocating
is a
time to do
need
this.
for
This
that
is
at
your
certain
investment.
times,
So I
but
already have my
I think a
doctorate.
lot of people
Those who are
do
teaching
that
or guiding
prematurely.
you as a
They
dissertation chair,
sometimes
they
don't
already have their
grasp the
doctorate.
concept where the
We
patient feels the
enjoy
need
being able to
to
provide you the
resolve
feedback
whatever
and guide you through the
whatever it
process.
is
It's
that's
something
going
that
on
we
with the
enjoy
feedback.
doing.
I
We're not
think
doing
to
this for
limit that
torture
mindset.
or
And I think
whatever
that as
reason,
adults,
but
we have to
it's
learn
really
how
about
to
how much time
communicate
that
with
you're
each other.
dedicating
And
and how
let me
much time
say,
that you're willing
well,
to
speaking of
unlearn to
adults, so
learn, right? So,
I was offended by
there are
that,
things
and
that
we need to
a
talk
lot
about
of these
something
people that
instead of
are going
just
through the
cutting
program that
people
I
off,
encounter,
because in this
they're
day and
older
age,
learners.
we have
They're already
much we have to cut
accomplished.
other
They've been
people.
established in a professional
And
world and
people
things
are
like that.
going
But by the end of
to
the day,
eventually they're going
all
to
that
upset you.
doesn't
They're
really
going to
matter
call you a
because of the fact
clever
that you're
every
starting
now and
from
then.
square
But
one.
I think it's
And so
important for
you
us to
have to
remember
dedicate
that
the
that's
time. So
okay.
even though your
That's
experience is
cool.
valuable
I don't
for
care
certain
if it's
aspects
your
of your journey,
closest
you have to
relationships
understand
or
that
your
this is
most
a
distant relationships.
wholly, completely
If
different
you
animal that
wish
you're
any of
encountering,
our
and
time,
that you have to
your
dedicate the
spouse
time
has
to be able
upset
to
you, offended
understand
you in some
some of
way,
the challenges that you're
has made you
experiencing
angry,
and
and but
developing
you
a
can't cut them
plan
off,
of action and a
obviously. That's I
strategy to
bet you
address
could,
it.
some people do, but you know what I mean. You,
So, research
we
design
have to
factors
cut
to
ourselves
consider
off
after
from
you did the
having
method
productive stuff.
selection.
I
What is
think
the
we're good.
research aims or
But
its goals? You want to
I'm still
determine
raised had
what is
no,
it that you're
but
really trying to
that's
study,
good.
and
You're
are
going to
these
have moments
studies
with your
that
children.
that
You're
you
going to
are
have moments with
considering
your parents, and you're
addressing
certainly going to
complex
have
problems?
moments with
What
your
answers are being
friends, and so
sought
just
from your
knowing
research
how to
questions?
say,
So,
okay,
when
since
you're
we have a
developing your
moment
research
here,
questions, what are the
let's
three
regroup,
central issues
and
that you're
handle our
trying to
local
find
government
out?
how
Think
we
about it
usually
like if you're
different
working
later
on a
on.
research
And
project
I
in the
think
grad
we have
level,
to remember too,
that
when
you
it
had to
comes to
have your
balance,
intro, your
it's not
conclusion, and you
just
had three main
about
points, and that's what
de-escalating
your
or
research
shutting
questions
down a
should
situation.
mirror. It should
Boundaries are
mirror
good to
something to the
prevent
effect
situations
of a
from
research
occurring.
project that you may do 20,
Yes,
25
and
pages,
I
where
think
you
that
have
and, you know, it's
three
really
key
interesting
themes
too. It's
that
not
you're
so much
looking
as
at
the fact that people
relative to
can't meet
your overall
boundaries or
study.
setting
And
boundaries.
it's
It's interesting you said that
not
about
the
the spouses,
same,
but
but it is of the same
it's
vein.
really more
And
about the
that's a good
internal
way to
family,
look at it if you're
the
struggling to develop
the
research
immediate family
questions.
dynamic. Starting to see that a
Data
lot more,
collection and data analysis.
whether I experience
How
it
are you
personally
going to do
or
the
if
data
it's
collection? What method are you going to
as a
use the data
friend or even
collection?
as
And
an
how are you
extended
going to
family
analyze the
member
data? And that will
dynamic.
help
And
you
it's just really
choose your
interesting
research
itself, the
design.
level
You
of
have to understand that
velocity
the
when it comes
qualitative
to
and the
family members cutting each other
quantitative
off,
selection
and I
are
just think
your
that's
method
very
selections.
interesting because of the
When you
fact
start
that
talking
we
about
as
a
African
single case
Americans,
study, that is a
our families
qualitative
were all
method
that we had,
design. If you
growing up,
are
and maybe
looking
we
at
don't
a
experience it
linear
to the
regression
extreme
analysis for
as
your
our
study, that
elders
is
had,
a
but
design for
that
a
was
quantitative
the
method.
thing at
So
Thanksgiving,
you'll have to look at
Easter,
Cresswell and maybe a couple
different
other
different holidays where we
methodological
would come together and we would
literature review
fellowship,
books
and even like
or
potentially
articles
move
to
to
be able to
church.
help guide you on that
When we go
process.
to church and
We'll
having
go over
fellowships
some
and
of
things of
that
that
today
nature.
in
And
this
it's just
particular
very
webinar.
just really interesting the stuff that
But
as we continue
ultimately,
to
that you have
go through
to
more years through
not
life and
guess, but
stuff,
be
it's
able
just
to
really
drive
intriguing, especially individuals
your
our age
selection
who are
through
very quick
research.
to cut people off, and sincerely do try to cut
So
people off,
for the research
and try to
design, it's
reestablish
either
and direct
conclusive or exploratory.
relationships with
And
people or
so
whatever the
on
case
the
may be,
quantitative side,
to help
it's
compensate
very
for that. But
conclusive, where qualitative is
yeah, I just thought that was just
exploratory.
really, I just
Quantitative
think it's just
designs
really
are well
unique in that
defined
regards because of the
and they're
fact that
structured a
it
little bit
seems like people
differently than it
bring
is
more
with
energy
qualitative. It's more
to
open-ended.
ignore
It has some
or not to
vagueness,
engage somebody,
ambiguity, ill-defined.
rather than
So
trying
you
to
pretty
often
much
either
can
pour in
shape it the way that
reconciliation
you
or
would
just
like.
even
It's more
reestablish a new
malleable on the
relationship.
qualitative side
Yeah, and
compared to the
sometimes you just
quantitative
need a
side
pause. You just need a
and
break.
sample
Setting
size. Now,
boundaries can really
obviously,
have to cut
you've
people
heard it
off
say if you're a sports fan,
long-term,
you may
permanently
say
or
that so and so is doing
indefinitely.
good for the first
It,
2 weeks,
it's
but that's a small
sometimes
sample
just
size. That is
what's
a quantitative
acceptable
viewpoint.
and
And
what's not
so to
acceptable for
be able to
you.
have
It
a
makes
good
people feel
assessment
comfortable
as to
enough
the
about that.
ability of that particular
And
athlete,
it's
you have
really
to see the
important
course
to
of
go
work
in there
over a
with
year or
stability
several
and
years,
boundaries.
because then you have enough
And I think
indicators
sometimes
to
we
be able
use
to say,
boundaries
is
as
this
a way to
person
protect
worth the
people,
value
and
of the
that's not what
contract, or is this
boundaries are.
person
That's just
performing at a
saying
high
no. I
level?
don't
Where a
really want to
qualitative
break
is
too
a
much
smaller
fall
sample
back,
size. It's
but
usually
I think that as a
probably anywhere of
culture,
like 20 to
we
30,
have a
depending on the
discovered and
design
not
requirements. And
necessarily
again,
known
you have
skill
to
set.
research and figure out what is
I think
the
to make
minimum
our
amount
point,
of
as a culture, we
respondents
use
to
more
make this a
abuse at work.
qualifiable
It
study.
kind of is almost like some of the other words that we
And
use
just
over the
remember,
last
it's
couple
driven
years
by
that
the
we have
research, not a
seen, such
preference.
as
One thing that I see
generational
students and
wealth,
candidates,
setting a
especially
legacy, and it's
early
very
on,
funny
is that they are making
how
a selection based on how they feel. And they
see those
come into
words
the
come up
program
as
saying, oh, I
much
want to do a qualitative
anymore.
study,
One
but
thing
they
that
don't
I
even
remember in
have
2000,
a really
especially during the
strong
pandemic, everybody,
understanding of what
other young
qualitative
person
methods
being
are. And
entrepreneurs,
so as
and
they
so
continue
the
through the
same
program,
people
and
that
you'll see
were
that as you advance
on social
for
media
those who are
talking
in my
about how
earlier
you used to
classes,
build a family
you'll
and
see
then
that as you
build this
advance,
type of wealth or
that
whatever the
the
case may be.
selection process is
It's
very
essentially to see
nuanced.
that less and less
You
people are doing
will
it, and there's nothing wrong with
likely
walking away from
switch
something that's
in
not
some
working.
cases
But
the approach
I
that you
do agree.
have
I think it's
for your
pretty
study. I do
cliche just to
recall
say,
that for
hey,
myself personally, I
establish your
started off as a
boundaries. And
qualitative,
so
same
we
thing
wanted to
like
kind of talk
the
that
majority of
from a
the
very
audience listening to this.
therapeutic
I will come in and
perspective.
say,
So
okay,
this
well,
is,
I want to do a qualitative
I'm not
study
a
because
mental health
that's what I
expert.
want
I
to do. I
said it
wanted to
many a
interview.
time.
And that's our
I'm not
perception. We
much of a
feel
mental
like
health
as
expert, but
researchers,
I'm
we
always
have to
feel
sit
like
and
it's
interview somebody and then we
appropriate to
compile that
defer to your
information
expert
for the
opinion because
results. And
they
even though
do
that's
give
partially
advice
true,
and
that's
dealing
not
with
the only way
complex
to research a
situations with
study.
complicated
With a
people. And
quantitative, it can
so one of
actually
the
answer
things that
questions in a
I could
way
ask you
that a
for your
qualitative study may
for your
not.
opinion
And
is,
so just
what do you
remember,
do
it
when
is the
somebody is
research, not
hard
a
of hearing?
preference.
Meaning that you can have a
So
conversation, have
selecting
a
the
dialogue with
framework,
an
it's
individual,
dictated by the
but that
purpose statement
person is
selection. You may
not
recall that the
as
very first
receptive
sentence
to anything
that
that you're
you
saying.
should have in your purpose statement
How
is
would
the
you
purpose of
address
this
those type of
XY
situations?
study is to
Well,
explore or
acceptance is
examine
powerful.
whatever. And so
Knowing who you're
remember
dealing
that
with,
when you are
what your
doing
job is
that
not going
selection
to
in a
please
purpose
that person.
statement,
And we have
it's
to
going to
remember
help
that we're not
dictate what's
responsible
going to
for
be the
it. They're
framework that you're going to
responsible, their
use. So if you're
adherence to the
qualitative, it's
boundaries that we're
conceptual.
trying to set in
If
the
it's
conversations that
quantitative,
we're
it's
having.
theoretical.
We're only
And you have to
responsible for
avoid
delivering that
inconsistencies
message
with
to
the
them
framework
as it
selection. That's
relates
something
to
that I
us. And
commonly
then they
see.
get to
I see
decide what
people
they do
saying,
with the
well, I
information.
want to do a
If
qualitative
they
single
are
case
on
study,
board with
but then
whatever
when
it
it
is that we're
comes to the writing
communicating to
section,
them
they'll
that
say
we
that this is
need
a
in the
theoretical
relationship.
framework, and
And
that's
at
not
that
true.
point, we have a
It's
choice to
if you're
make for
doing a
ourselves.
qualitative study,
And
99% of the time,
respecting,
it
we
will
can
be
also
under a
respect
conceptual
that they're
framework.
not adhering to
Can
whatever it is that we're
qualitative
asking
be
for,
theoretical?
but
Yes,
respecting that
but
and
it's
saying,
very,
okay, well,
very,
then if
very
this is where we are and I'm not
it doesn't
getting
happen that
the
often. And
receptiveness
so
or
it's just
response
better
that
to
I
err
would
on the
like to
side of
have
caution
from
and just
this
stick with the
person,
conceptual
can
and the
you
qualitative
create some
for
distance
the
so
extent of
that your
your
emotional
dissertation that you're working
well-being
on
and
or
mental
the outline or the
stability isn't
prospectus.
affected negatively by that person's
For
behavior
your
or by the
conceptual framework,
person's
it's generally
inability
associated
to
with your
maintain
qualitative
those
research.
boundaries or
The
respect those
phenomenon may
boundaries.
not be explained with one
So when you're
theory. So you
saying
may look
maintain
at different
distance, can you go into a little
theories
bit more
after your literature
detail as
review and
to
say that
or some
this
examples or
phenomenon,
recommendations that
based on
individuals
different
can do
research
to
using different
maintain or to
leadership
create
theories,
and maintain a
may
distance for
look at
someone
or
where it's
systems
safe
theories or
for them
whatever
emotionally, mentally,
program
to
that you're going
engage?
through, you may
Yeah.
see that
Well,
this
it's different for
phenomenon is
everybody.
not
It really
unique
depends on what your
to
values
just
are,
one
because
particular
our
theory, and
values are
that you
set
might need to look
on
at a
our
combination of
personal
theories to help
values.
develop your
And so for
conceptual
some people,
framework. And
that
that's where you
distance is
get your
going to
concepts
be
and your
more of an
actors
emotional nature, that
associated with this particular
when we
framework.
are talking
You
to
may
that person
clarify
or whenever we're in
assumptions in
close
this
proximity, it
particular
doesn't necessarily mean that we're
framework
not going to
guidance,
be
and it also
around that
understands the
person or
main
talk to them.
concepts
But
under
whenever
the
we are with
investigation
that
by the
person, they
researcher.
start to say things or they start to behave in a way
Whereas your
that triggers for
theoretical
us,
framework, and
or
remember, this is
we notice that they're
quantitative,
having
it
an
explains a
emotional response
phenomenon
that
through a
we don't
critical lens.
necessarily like.
And
So
so,
that's
again,
already
this is where
familiar.
things become
Then
more
we
well
start to
defined, it
say,
becomes well
okay, well,
structured. You're
I'm
going to
going to
get
get off the
definitive
phone
answers.
and I'll
And this
talk
is
to you
where
later.
the
Love you,
theoretical
that type
framework
of
comes
thing. If
into
it's,
play.
close
It also
family member,
shapes the
then
questions
be
that are being
able to know
asked.
when to turn the
So,
switch
if
off
you're
so it
doing a
doesn't get out of
survey that has
control.
a Likert
For
scale,
some people,
um,
or if you're at a family
Likert scale
gathering,
survey,
when you're
and you use
noticing that
SurveyMonkey or
behavior
whatever
coming
way
back
to
in
collect your
and you're
data,
noticing your emotional
you're going to have
response,
a series
being
of
able to
questions,
determine, is
a
this
number
a
of questions
situation
really,
that could get out
that's
of
going to
control?
be
And is this a
weighted either one through
place or a
five or one through
space that's
seven,
going to
typically.
trigger some
And
things
then
that's
that
going to
data is
cause
going
me
to
to
help
get
be
out
able
of
to help
character in a time
provide the analysis
that
for
I
you
don't
to do
want
your
to?
assessment
And
as
so
to
being able to remove
whether the
yourself in
hypothesis
that
is
situation,
accepted or
sometimes
rejected.
that's just going to
The
another room.
challenges and
Sometimes it's
the
leaving the
questions
location
that you're going to
altogether,
ask will
but
help
it doesn't
drive
mean that you
additional
should leave the
research. And so,
relationship. And over
again, because the fact that it's well structured, it's closed ended, and it's well defined, there may be some lingering questions to ask once you get the data that will help drive additional research. And so you actually see that a lot with theoretical studies, or studies with theoretical frameworks, that they have a little bit more for the gaps of the literature and on the conclusion section, because some of the questions that could have been explored was not provided in the framework for this particular study under the quantitative
you're just
method.
not going to be in the
And
same
then
space as
finally,
that person. You can't find
most
people
theoretical
apart.
frameworks are institutional
Learning
policy
people
learning
sometimes and accepting
exercises.
people
So if you're in
sometimes
healthcare
isn't necessarily
administration and you're looking
interacting
at
with
the
them.
effects of
It's
cutting the price of
respecting
insulin
them,
and how it's going to
valuing them
improve the
as a
quality of
human being,
care
and
for a
knowing that
particular
either
ethnic group,
you or
that's
them
more
or
of a
both
policy
parties
type
are not
approach, or even an
able to
institutional, depending on
coexist
how
in
you're
what we
framing
have
it.
right now.
And so a quantitative
That's
study
pretty
may
powerful
be more
information right there.
beneficial in
Being
that
able
regards.
to be cognizant and be mindful of saying, hey, this is something that's making
For
me
your
feel some
literature
type of way.
review,
I need
it's
to look
critical in
into it.
determining the rationale,
Instead
the
of
purpose, and
acquiescing
the
to the
intent of the
situation, I
study.
continue to
As
engage in
doctoral
that
students, you
behavior
must review
to the point
extensive
state where
research
it
prior
actually
to
does more
selection.
harm than good.
And so this
And
is not actually
so,
the literature review section that
based
you
on that,
normally do in the
obviously,
second
looking at the
chapter,
history
but this
of the
is
individual to get to that particular point.
this really is just
If it
about
was a
way
family
that you're
member, a
reviewing your
very, very
research. And
close
you may
friend or
recall earlier
acquaintance.
in my
So,
earlier modules, as you're
people do
writing your
have the
outline, your
capacity to
prospectus to
change.
create a
And,
cloud or a
some
repository
people
of
may
your
do
articles,
change,
going
very
back to reviewing
rapidly,
those
and
articles again,
sometimes
and
they may
hopefully
do
you're
it
able to index
incrementally. But,
key factors about
how important
or key
is hanging on
characteristics
to the
of those
past of somebody's
articles to be
behavior,
able to see what kind of trends
or
are available. You're doing a
interactions, past
comparative and a
conflicts, and how
document
important is
analysis
that
to see what would
for
be the best approach for
I
your
guess
study.
establishing a strong
And
foundation
ultimately,
in the
it's up
future.
to
So,
you,
like,
right?
if you had
But
a
the
we had you at
methodologists will
Tiffany for
actually
2 or
have
3 years,
insight, and they're going to
and
see
then
if what you're
for whatever
providing
reason you
is
do
in
have to
alignment, or and
disagreement,
also are you supporting that
how a person
method and design
views that
approach
past,
through the
as it
appropriate
was as a
research.
lab weapon,
And you
to
want
use
to
it as
avoid
a
glossing information. You want to address
foundation
the
to deal
knowledge
with an
gap. So
individual
don't try to
in a current
rush it. I
situation.
understand that you have homework assignments for those who are
Well,
students,
it's
and you
really
want to
more
try
so
to
on the
get it
severity
in or
or
whatever the case
the
may be.
that's
But
to which
if you're
those
not
disagreements
allocating the
have
appropriate
occurred.
time
Of course, you
to
talked
really
about
review the
time frame and
literature and
frequency,
really review
but
your
we
extra
also have to talk
resources
about the intensity
independently,
of it.
you're
When
going
you
to
look
make
3 years
you're going to
ago,
make
how
your
bad
method and
was it?
design selection a little bit
So
more
it's really
complicated.
going to depend
And
on
it's,
that.
a
Is it
lot of
somebody
times what
that
you're going to
you
select
know
today, if
that
you're an earlier
right
student and you're
away, as
working on
soon
your
as this
outline, your
person starts to
perspectives,
behave one way,
it's
or
not
for
going to
some
be the
people,
same as once
this
you start
person
actually writing on
is
the
this way whenever they're
dissertation
drinking
itself.
alcohol.
And there are
And
times and
so
stuff,
if you
even as a
go to an
student,
event or a
you're going
gathering
to
and that
change
person
your
is
method of
drinking,
design.
you know what's going to
So
happen more than
for
likely.
the
And so you
um,
start to prepare
outline and the
yourself
perspective
to protect
standpoint, and
yourself
even
in
for the
that situation.
dissertation, depending
What we
on
know
the
when it comes to
dissertation
students, the
manual
best
requirements,
literature
which could
people work
vary,
with is past behavior.
the
And
point is
it
that you
doesn't
want to
mean
have
that people don't
350
change
words
because they
in your framework
absolutely do. People
identification.
learn things all the
However,
time.
you want to
However,
start your heading by
based on
stating it's a
history, you
conceptual or
know for the
theoretical
most part what
framework. So
people are
again,
capable of. And
conceptual,
so
it is
it's
qualitative,
important that you arm yourself
theoretical
with
is
that
quantitative,
information
and you
and
will find
decide
that
what you're going to do to
alignment
protect
through
yourself. And
your purpose
sometimes you're
statement.
protecting them by
In the
protecting
first
yourself,
state sentence,
knowing
you
that
want to
you're not
restate
going to
the
allow things to
specific
get out of
problem of the
hand because
study.
when that
So if
person
you
starts
are doing
drinking
what you have been
or they
guided
get
to
around
do
certain
through these
people, maybe
lectures
there's
and by following
a
the
crowd
instructions for
or
these
individual
assignments,
that's
or
opposing
even just
them,
based on the
or
feedback,
maybe they need
if you
calmness
provided the
to
specific
be around
problem
before
in your
they
problem
start to behave
statement,
a certain way.
then you
And
will
you
put
know
that in
that
the
if they're
first
around these
sentence
people, they're going to
in
behave
your
this way, and maybe
theoretical or your conceptual framework,
alcohol may
because
be
you're
the
basically,
the other
as you may recall,
A.
the problem statement is going to be referred to throughout the entire
So
dissertation. And
yeah,
so
yeah,
when you write
absolutely.
that
So
one
it really
paragraph, you're
depends.
going to
Frequency
insert
and
different pieces
intensity are
or
certainly
expand on the
factors.
nature of your problem
Sure.
statement in
And
different
again,
areas.
I
And
guess
here's
when it comes
one
down to it,
right here
power
where you're
follows
going
suit,
to have
right?
to restate the
So when
specific
people
problem
do
of the study.
apologize,
Your research support should
or
have at least a
sometimes
minimum
it
of
gets
2
to a
peer-reviewed journal
situation where one
articles.
person is
And just
apologizing, the
for
other
the
person
sake of
doesn't, or rarely
discussion,
does at all.
just as I stated with the other
How do
modules,
you move
your
forward in
research should
those
be
type
less
of
than 5 years
instances?
old from peer-reviewed
Well, some
journals,
people
except
don't
for when you're using a
apologize
methodologist
in a way
reference
that
such as
you did. They
Cresswell,
may not be
which could be
traditional,
beneficial.
I'm
So
sorry.
even if you
Some
don't
people
refer
apologize
Cresswell
because of
into your
behavior.
framework
So we
identification
have to make
paragraph,
sure that
at
we're
the
not
very
looking
least,
for someone
review
to
Cresswell, a
interact
very
the way
solid
we
book. He
do.
has different
Because
iterations,
some will
heavily
say that
used
they're
not only
sorry,
just
but their
for
behavior
your
doesn't
university, but
say
also
that.
for other universities across the country. And that
So,
leadership theory also
what are your
is helpful
recommendations
if you can
moving forward then?
identify it in
So,
your
for
framework.
individuals who may be struggling
Don't
with,
necessarily have to do it right
various periods of
away,
conflict,
but at some point in
and
time,
not really
whatever
fully
leadership theory
understanding the
that's
reason why
affected
conflicts
under a scholar
manifest,
practitioner leader
like say we
model
said before,
should be
going into a
applicable
call
at
or
some
just
point in
continue
your prospectus or
recording
your outline.
that,
I
there's a lot of people dealing
normally
with a lot of
inform students
stressors
to
and a lot of
try to
factors
put a
that are not
stab into it in
known,
your outline
and may
in
not be
your
articulated, that could be underlying
framework
conditions to
section.
be
But if you
got
don't do
into
it, you
those
will do it at
conflicts.
some
So,
point. But
moving
leadership
forward, what are those
theory
recommendations?
is very
What are the
important
recommendations you
for
may
the
have
duration of your
for
dissertation.
individuals moving forward who may feel like that they've been mired in
So we're going
conflict
to address the
because of their
significance of the
design?
study. And so we're going to review the gaps in the
I'm sorry, can
literature
you ask that question
um,
again? Because
first,
I
and
don't
that's
quite
important.
understand
So
what you're
again, you're going
asking.
to look at all the articles that you
So,
had
I guess, like,
and
moving
whatever
forward.
that
So,
you
like, let's say that
use to help
for people
develop your
who
framework, you're also going to use that to help develop your significance of the study. You may need to pull different articles as well. Another way, if you have a problem conceptualizing what the significance of the study may be,
So
look
what
at the dissertations.
recommendations
As you may
would you suggest for
recall, I
that individual or
stated that you have
individuals
to
who may find themselves
try
as
to pull
always
several
needing to either
dissertations
clashes,
relative to
personality
the
clashes,
scope
and
of your study
conflicts
and see
between,
what they're
the
talking
basis
about.
of
So
it
if
and
you're
makes
looking
total
at a
sense.
qualitative study
With
in
different
a
people?
education field,
It can be
Are
different
they
for
group?
some
pull
people.
3 or 4
It's just
Okay.
dissertations,
just a general.
look
I'm
at
just saying.
their
So like I'm thinking,
recommendations,
and so
look at
when
some of the
we have a
literature
lot
review
of
that
these
they have,
conversations,
and they may
such as
identify
this,
the
I pull
gaps
out
for you. They
from
may
either
specifically
personal
say gaps
or
in
I
the
may pull
literature
out
or
from just
other opportunities for
conversation or
research
just
could include
observation.
X, Y,
And
Z.
so that
And then
particular
you want
question
to
actually deals
basically
with just the
continue
whole
down that rabbit
gamut
hole, so to
of the
say,
stuff, just
to
kind of just
see,
through
is
observation.
this
Like,
relative to
okay,
your
so
study?
and so makes feel
Because that will help you
this
determine,
person may
is
feel
it
a
a
certain type of
novel
way
study that you're trying to
when these
complete,
issues
or it's an
happen, but these
extensive
issues are repetitive,
prior
right?
research. And
So
so
how
for
would that
those who are in
individual be able
healthcare, if you're
to
talking about nursing shortages that
deal
has
with
been talked
conflict
to
moving forward or
and
preparing to
discussed and
start just
studied to
even
death,
self
so
recognitions
what
as they're
part
dealing with
of
this conflict?
staff and shortages
Yeah,
that is
if
different
you're
than what we
always
already
having
know that you're
conflicts
trying
with
to
other
study? And
people,
so that
with a
is what
variety
you
of
would
people or
say,
the same person,
contribution to the
then you
literature is
definitely
very
have to
important. How are you going to
listen. You
contribute to
definitely need to
something
do some self
that's been
evaluating to
there for quite
determine
some
if
time,
you're
and what
dealing
new
with some
value are
some
you
type
adding to that
of mood
research? And so
disorder
if you
or
are looking
personality
at a
disorder,
tried
or
and
maybe
true
you just don't
conversation
communicate
that's
well as other
on your
people, or
study,
maybe
then
you
be
don't
prepared
have a
to
good
be
handle
asked,
on
like,
racial
how is this going to be
relations.
something
And
different
that's something
than what's
that
already
you
been
can
out
go
there?
to a
Um,
professional for, see a
Coronavirus
therapist.
research is
And
very
it doesn't
important,
matter if it's a matter
and then
of
you'll see it
emotional regulation
more over the
or
next decade, I
poor
would
ability
imagine, in
to
different
problem
iterations.
solve or
Excuse me,
resolve
in different
conflicts,
iterations.
or
But you
there's some
want
type of
to,
personality disorder, any
if
of
it's a
those
new
things, or
research, you
anything
want
as
to
well,
make sure
you
that you're
can see
addressing that
someone.
and saying that
And it
this is
doesn't even have to
contributing
be
to
a
the literature,
licensed therapist.
because of the
Sometimes
fact
for
that
some of those
there
things,
has
not
not
even
been a
for
lot of
regulation and all those
research as
critical
it
things,
relates
but
to
some
the
things that
diversity supplier
communication where you need to see a
relationships
coach and so forth.
post COVID, right?
But no one is
And so
coming to
that's
help
something
you.
that
But
hasn't been talked a
if
lot
you're always
because of the
having
fact that COVID has
conflicts, I'm
happened
sorry
recently,
to some
and now we're
degree,
trying to
because
provide
I'm going to
your
conflict isn't
our
going to help
insight
anyone.
through
There's some
research
internal
and through
turmoil
conducting
that's
the
occurring
survey.
with that, either
And
before
then
the
what
conflict
industry or
occurs or
stakeholders
on an
benefit from the
ongoing
study? So if you're
basis
in the
or
education
once the
field,
conflict
is this going to
starts.
benefit K
And
through
if that's
12
happening all the time, that's
educators in the
exhausting.
city of
And you need to
St. Louis?
know
Is it going to
what's
benefit
fueling that fire
college
all the time.
administrators? Is it going to benefit guidance
So you were
counselors? Is
saying a
it going
coach. You're
to
saying maybe not
benefit physicians,
necessarily a
right?
therapist, but a
Is it
coach.
going
So
to
how would you
benefit
be able
different
to identify a
IT
coach?
professionals? Or
That
is it
could be
just
an
going to benefit
individual.
the
Does it have
IT
to be
industry in
somebody
general?
that's a
Is it going to
professional per
benefit the
se,
metaverse?
or
There's a
is
lot
it
of
a
answers,
mentor or a close
a lot of
relationship with an
questions out there that
individual?
you want to seek to answer, but you
I'm
want to
I am
select the
all
right
about
question
making
that's
sure we're
relative
seeking
to the
out
study that
qualified
you're trying to
individuals
propose
to
and
provide
complete.
whatever the service is that you're looking for. However, I think there
So
are
as you are
times
writing
when
this
a
particular section,
mentor
just note
or
that it
just
should be
somebody
350
that you
words.
know
And again,
personally, or
for
maybe they're a
every
member of your church, or
write-up
maybe it's
section
someone
webinar that I
personally
have
at your
provided,
job
I have been
that
very
you really
specific on the
respect
word
and you
count.
like how
Stay
they
within the
operate and how
range.
they handle
And one thing
conflict,
that
and
really gets
you
students
like
in
how they
trouble
interact with other people, and you think
as
they
they are
have a good
going
handle
through the
on
process
emotional
as a doctoral
regulation,
student is
and
that
you
when I'm
like to
stating
know how
350
they do it,
words,
how they
you're
handle
providing
people, and
700
things that
words.
they
You're not
do.
following the
It's
most
okay to
basic
ask them for
instructions,
help as
350
well
words.
if you don't want
So
to see a
make
therapist.
sure that your
However,
significance of the
if
study
there
stays
is
within
an
the
emotional
350 word
regulation
range.
issue
If you're at
or potential
352 or
personality
357, I'm not
disorder,
going to
which
lose some
those
sleep
things
over it.
you
360,
need
I'm
to
not going
go
to lose
to
sleep
a
over it.
licensed
But when you're about
professional
5 to 7 to
to get
800
a
words
proper
in,
diagnosis. Don't
or you're
diagnose
having
yourself
multiple
or allow someone
paragraphs,
to that's
right?
not qualified to
Then you're
diagnose you.
more than
Those
likely
are
out of
things you
those
need to
parameters.
get
And
to
you
a
have to
professional help
understand that the
for. Then
dissertation
those are when you need
process
to
is
get
about
treatment for.
precision and
That's
your
not something
ability
a
to
coach is
follow
going to
the
be able to help
expectations
out with
set
or
forth by your
mentor.
instructor or your dissertation
Absolutely,
chair.
absolutely. I think
And
that's
so
some
back
really
to
good
this
points.
particular
Um,
conversation, you
and
want to
then
provide a minimum of two
I guess
references
also
from
too from
peer-reviewed
your
journals
qualified
with
opinion,
identified
like I
gaps,
said, the
and
stresses,
then you want to
right? You can
identify the
serve
stakeholder or
lobbyists
industry
doing
that
a
may
lot of stressful
benefit from the
duties, so
findings
they're
of the
doing with their
study.
job,
But
dealing with
I
their
wanted
family,
to stress
dealing
again,
with their
do not make
business, or it could
assumptions
be
or make
just
statements based on your
maybe on
thoughts. You
Alzheimer's,
need to
bad
cite it
communication.
because the
How
reason
can
being is
that
that
person
you
better
only
prepare
have a
themselves to go
small,
in
we'll
through
go
the
back to
ins
the
and
sample
outs of the
size. You have
day?
a
Not the
small sample
person's
exercise as
the
to
person
what
who
these
may be
problems are. And so
dealing with
if
some of
unless you're
the
literally
stressors in
everywhere
life,
at all
how should they
times,
engage
you're
other
not going to
people? Like,
really understand the
remember one
depth of the
scientist should
problem. But
probably
if
keep
you're
an
seeing
eye
it
of
specific to your
themselves
area and you
before
know that
wading
specific to your
into
area,
real
it's not
conflict.
reflective to the overall
Well, is it
general
impacting
problem,
really
and that your
important
problems
political
that you're
areas or not?
experiencing in your
If
industry
you're
is more
looking to
unique, or
measure
within your
these
region is more
stressors
unique
that you're
than others,
mentioning from
then
different
yeah,
areas
then
around the
that should
country
make a
that
valuable
entering
study. But you
some
can't
major
say,
area of
well,
life, that's a
so and
problem
so
that we
students are
may
doing
need
well
to
in this school
You're
because they
trying
stay in
to
this
have
particular
orders and
neighborhood,
some
and you
make
just make a
believe
random
religion.
assumption that, okay, if you stay
When
in
I
this
say
neighborhood, all
maybe
the
areas of
students
life, I mean
perform at a high
maybe
level. That's not
interpersonal
necessarily true. The
relationships
scores
is
overall
impacting
could be a little
what
bit
they
higher,
perform
but
on the
is that
job.
necessarily
Is it
true? And what
impacting their
factors
overall
help
emotional state
drive
or mental
higher
health?
student scores? Is
Are
it
you
household
letting
income?
people
Is it a
in?
college
Are
education?
you
Is
in
it a
the mood
two-parent, single parent?
emotionally? Are you
So you have
anxious
all these
or
subsequent questions that could
emotionally
come out. So
uncomfortable
that's where the
to some
research is
degree
very
most of the
important.
time? How
Citing
does
your
it
work is
impact
very
you?
important as well too. So for every section that you
Stuff.
have,
You want to roll today?
having a
And you
citation
didn't even tell me
is
what you were
basically
asking. I'm
mandatory,
just throwing it
with
out
the
there.
exception of the research
Well, no, I'm
questions. Now,
just,
there
it's just
for
more free
me,
flowing
I will
conversation
provide an
But I
today.
like
allowance
it. No, it's
for a very
good. It's
brief
that's good.
paragraph
It's
to
because
provide an
it
explanation
doesn't have to
as
be
to the
stupid. But no, these
rationale
are
why
really
you
good
did the
questions,
research
and it's
questions.
stuff that we should
And
be
if you
talking
do
about
that, you
because
still have
I
to
think
cite,
some
but there should not be
people, a
one
lot of people,
section throughout your
just because
entire
they're woke,
outline
believe
or your
that
entire
they are
dissertation
able to
that does not
necessarily
feature a
listen. Here's the
citation
thing:
of some sort.